Welcome to the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. I'm thrilled you're here. My name is Jason Elkins, and in addition to being your host, I'm also a former U.S. Army paratrooper, third-generation commercial hot air balloon pilot, paramotor pilot, ex-Montana fly fishing guide, advanced open water scuba diver, and a full-time nomad that's visited more than 30 countries on 6 continents. As a seasoned adventure travel expert with a passion for creating and sharing meaningful experiences, I'm on a quest to impact the lives of adventure travelers, the tour operators they rely on, and the communities that host them. Every week, I bring you exclusive interviews with fascinating adventure tourism experts who have agreed to share their personal stories, favorite destinations, and some invaluable travel insights they've picked up along the way. We'll enjoy a casual conversation, create some connections, and likely share some laughs. It's my hope that by the end of each episode, this big world will feel just a bit smaller. Let's get started, shall we? Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. This is quite an interesting episode today. We've got Tom Williams. He is the founder and creator of Desert Island Survival. And maybe you can tell from the name of his company a little bit about what that's about, but I'm sure you're as intrigued now as I was when I first came across Tom. So Tom, so happy to have you on the show. Welcome.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, Jason.
This is it's very cool. I can't remember exactly how I came. Actually, I can. I was on the ATTA, Adventure Travel Trade Association network, and one of your colleagues reached out to me, actually somebody that works with you on your team, and I was totally intrigued when I read kind of what she was doing and reached out to you, and happy that you were able to join us. So Tom, real quick, we're going to go into some of the background and how you got to where you are from where you started. But just real quick, what is Desert Island Survival? What's your elevator pitch for Desert Island Survival?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are curators of, we're an adventure travel company that basically create castaway experiences on uninhabited tropical islands. So we rent these picture postcard tropical islands. We have one in Panama, Philippines, and Tonga, and we bring in individuals to, first they learn survival skills on the island. It's like a survival light phase. And then they have a 3-day kind of full survival experience where they have little more than a machete and a handful of fish hooks, and they have to kind of live out this adventure.
Cool. So anybody that's listening to this that has seen television in the last 30 years is probably thinking, some names of some TV shows that they've seen in the past are kind of coming up. So I'm guessing there was some inspiration there.
Yeah, absolutely. I used to watch, there was a show called Bear Grylls The Island back in the UK and Channel 4. We actually used that very same island in Panama. That was one of the things that certainly would have planted the seed for me. Obviously a big fan of Castaway. I just always had this desire to be, in this, on the edge of the map, where there's very little impact and influence from humans, and that tropical island, and disconnected from society and humanity, and fending out a living, sure. Fending out a survival for myself.
Yeah, that's very cool, and I know there's more to that story. So now we're going to jump back as far to the beginning as you think we need to go to help our listeners understand, how did you get to this point? How far back into your childhood, growing up, where do you think was the moment that started all this for you?
I mean, we'll jump all the way back and try and race through it fairly quickly because it's kind of interesting, I guess. I mean, I was not your classic adventurer, or, you wouldn't have chosen me when I was at school for setting up Desert Island Survival. I was the fattest kid in my school. Academically, I came bottom of my school. Things were not looking good. My nickname was Bum. I scraped through school. I went and got a proper job, what's expected of you from your family and society. And I found myself living in Maidenhead, which is a very dreary place outside of London, selling software. And before then I'd been working as a snowboard instructor, and I'd done a bit of traveling, and then suddenly there I was in my cubicle selling software, and I was depressed, and I was like, goodness me, surely there's more to life than this. And I was drowning my sorrows, drinking a few pints with my mate Paul, and he said, mate, I'm thinking about walking to the North Pole next year. And I was like, okay, that is what I need. I don't want to be pigeonholed as a software salesman. I need to walk to the North Pole. So I ended up signing up to a race to the North Pole. I trained for 2 years. I raised money for 2 years. And eventually, when I was 27, I walked to the North Pole and we won the race. We won it by 2 days, missed the world record by 2 hours. And then once I'd done that, I think, I'd taken such a big leap out of my comfort zone and Pandora's box was open. It was very hard for me to go back to, inverted commas, normal life of selling software and being in a cubicle. But I kind of did. I met my wife and we moved to Chile with her job. And then the only job in English in Chile I could do was in finance. And I found myself selling pensions, working in building investment portfolios. And I was back in a cubicle and couldn't believe it. And because, I needed cash. And I spent many a day just kind of daydreaming out the window about being in nature, escaping and disconnecting. And I thought about being marooned on a desert island. So I was just Googling. I found one company sort of offering this experience. Went on their trip and it felt very short of what I was looking for. It wasn't an uninhabited island. There was a guy living on it. There were lights on the horizon, boats coming past. It didn't feel disconnected. It was infested with sandflies and mosquitoes, which can change the mentality of the most stoic survivor. And it's the guy teaching it. He's brilliant, but he was also quite militant and army and coarse and a bit misogynistic. And I was like, if you just found really beautiful islands and you brought in kind of a bit more emotionally intelligent sound instructors who get it and can bring a group together, you could create something really special. So I was like, why don't I do it? So yeah, back in 2017, I kind of bootstrapped the business. I think I set up for £4,000. Half of that went on hammocks, like expedition hammocks. And I put out a note on Facebook saying, look, I've set up this company. Who wants to come on my first trip? I managed to rent this island in Panama from watching the credits of that TV show. And yeah, 4 mates were like, yeah, man, we're up for this. And they invited 4 of their friends and these 8 guys turned up. And, I was like, look, mistakes are going to happen. It's going to be raw. And they're like, yeah, that's what we want. And it was, but they were like, dude, you've got something really special here. This is exceptional. And yeah, we went from there, and I set about learning more and more bushcraft skills. I found an amazing mentor and a guy called Tom McElroy, who's a bushcraft wizard. He's on the island right now in Panama running a trip. And yeah, we run about 20 expeditions a year in Panama, Philippines, and Tonga.
That is so cool. And what really landed for me was the first trip you went on, where you said the guy was kind of militant and maybe not real high on the EQ level. And I can see where you like, okay, we need to take this concept of like life or death type of survival, like militant, like, hardcore stuff, and turn it into something that's actually a pleasant experience.
Yeah.
But without making it so pleasant that now you're at a beach resort, so finding that balance in between, I'm sure is that kind of a moving target for you guys? Is that something that's always
Definitely.
like making adjustments probably on each trip? And you also mentioned like for the first group of guys, you're like, there's going to be some bumps along the way. It's not going to be, this is our first time doing it, but you can almost get away with some of that stuff with this type of trip, right?
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
Yeah, it's like, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a couple of things there. So like it is all about finding that tightrope of challenging, but not so challenging that everyone quits. And I'd say about 1 in 25, 1 in 30 people quit. They don't last the 8 days on the island. And obviously we all have a different barometer of what is challenging, and we've all got different life experiences. And so one person's exceptionally hard as another person's easy. And I recently had a lady who had never, like, every time she'd left the US, she had stayed in 5-star hotels, and her son was like, I really want to do this. Can you come with me? And so she was so far out of her comfort zone, and she ended up quitting after the 5 days. The first 5 days, you're sleeping in expedition hammocks. We're feeding you really well. We're teaching you all these skills. It's survival light, but there's still no toilet. You're still not got showers. All of this was just so much for her to comprehend. But she went home. She's messaged afterwards saying that it was the most impactful experience of her life, that it's opened her eyes. And she had suffered from migraines for 20 years, and they've gone from eating this kind of clean diet and removing things like sweeteners. So even though she quit, it still hopefully was quite a transformational experience for her. So yeah, finding that balance is definitely really key.
Actually, what you said makes sense. We tend to, in our society, I think we tend to think about you either complete or you don't complete. And if you don't complete something the way other people think you should, then it's complete failure. And the reality is, I mean, I'm just thinking of just life in general. You know, sometimes we start things and we get the value that we need to get out of those things, and then it's time to move on to the next thing. You know, It can be the person that takes a job in a finance job, you know, working in a cubicle because everybody told them that's what they're supposed to do, and they're supposed to do that until they retire, until their 401k hits a certain number, and they can get stuck in that, and that's not maybe right for everybody. And the person that does it for 6 months and says, okay, screw this, I don't want to do this, and they leave, that can be a good thing. So maybe somebody that comes and stays on the island for 5 days out of 8, maybe that's just where they got to the point. Okay, I got what I wanted to get out of this, and it's okay. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, 100%. I guess you could almost say like an entrepreneur setting up a business that doesn't make it, but they learn a huge amount from it. And then their third or fourth business does take off because they've been growing and building their skill sets from the previous ones. It doesn't mean it has to be, it doesn't have to be a massive success. You still learn from it, right?
We all have our own kind of barometers or our own, definitions of success. You know, if you're there for 5 days and then you go home and get rid of a bunch of junk that you have in your house because you realize you don't need all that stuff and your life gets better, then I guess you won, didn't you?
Yeah, 100%.
I don't know. Interesting. I can't even imagine some of the things you've seen and the stories and the interactions between people. And I want to go that direction because I'm curious, like when we watch these TV shows where there's people doing these things trying to survive, there's a lot of emotions that get involved. And I know in those scenarios, there's a lot on the line, a lot of like money, maybe for winning or whatever that maybe you don't have on your trips. But I suspect there's still a lot of emotional interaction. And do people get kind of like mean to each other? I'm just curious. Is it competitive in the sense that people are like, hey, you're not pulling your weight, we're going to vote you off the island? Or what is the psychology around these trips?
I mean, I can tell you firsthand from the TV show I was on and from my friends who work as bushcraft consultants for many of these TV shows that drama is always injected, that it, naturally, I don't know if you've ever read the book Humankind, but, we move away from adversity and competing and stuff will generally all get on really well. And you could also use the example of I'm going to draw a blank now. The guys in Tonga in the 60s, these 16-year-old kids, they stole a fishing boat and they ended up on an island. And it was the Raw Lord of the Flies. I don't know if the Lord of the Flies book. Yeah, we all had to read that at school, but it was written by a cantankerous teacher who was an alcoholic and hated children. And so he was like, yeah, they're all going to end up fighting. But the real Lord of the Flies was these kids in Tonga that they lived for 8 months on an island, and they built up structures. Like if there was a conflict or an argument between them, one went 400 meters down one end of the beach and the others went the other 400 meters, and then they came back 4 hours later and hugged it out. And it was incredible to see what happened. And the reality on our expeditions is very much the same. We get people from all different walks of life. Like I've had professional footballers, Russian billionaires, and builders, plasterers, and students, and the whole spectrum in between. And your status, your money means nothing in a survival situation. You're all back to just a hunter-gatherer. And it truly brings out the best in people. I think, I look at how we live now in modern society as being born into captivity. We're 99% identical to our hunter-gatherer ancestors. That is our natural state, and how we choose to live our lives now is really desperately unnatural. And so when you bring people back to living in nature, to having a responsibility and a focus on finding their food, that good amount of movement and exercise, sunlight, people start to feel the happiest and best that they've ever felt in their lives. And despite some of the hardships, they honestly feel like they're glowing. And so this all culminates to people really getting on very well. A lot of vulnerability around the campfire, people sharing stories and accelerating friendships. Within 8 days, people feel like they've known each other for years. And so it's wonderful that you might get one weird fish every 4 or 5 trips, but between the other 9 people on the trip or so, it dilutes it very well. Everyone's always very understanding, and people just tend to get on so well and forge beautiful friendships.
That's it's very cool. So what I hear you saying is on the television shows, because I think everybody kind of wants to see a glimpse behind the screen or behind the curtain. And I'm sure that when you go on as a contestant, you probably sign non-disclosure agreements and all this stuff. But what I hear you saying is on some of those, it's staged. You said kind of inject
Completely.
that drama and create those situations. Because I believe it. When I watch those shows, I'm like, wow, I can just imagine the producer like, hey, do you know what so-and-so said about you? I was just over there videoing them and they said something and this and just like almost that would be a miserable job, I think, to maybe be a producer on one of those shows and to just be there just to throw matches onto the fire or throw matches onto the
stoke it with kerosene.
I'm not. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. So that's interesting. And the other thing, I love what you're saying about kind of our society is more, traditionally more hunter gatherers, that type of, for millions of years, that's how we evolved. And our society has really gone a different direction where it's more cubicle, it's more farming, right? In a sense, whether you're farming in a field or you're farming in a cubicle, you're sitting still, you're doing the same consistent thing day in, day out with the hopes of something happening, at the end of the season, as opposed to going out hunting and gathering where it's like, today, I got to get something today. In the moment. And I've listened to some conversations or some people that kind of indicated that, there's a lot of resurgence, a lot of talk about ADD and ADHD in the world. And I was listening to somebody I thought was pretty brilliant, and they were kind of explaining, well, if you have quote unquote ADHD, you're actually very well adapted to our culture 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, because that's what ADD is. You can walk out through the woods and you see things and you're able to kind of perceive a lot of things. So you get distracted by, there's a monkey or there's an animal that I got to go after. And it's that constant energy level that doesn't work so well if you're sitting in a cubicle looking at a computer screen all day. So I don't know how to tie this conversation into what you're talking about, but help me out here.
I'll take the conch. So I think focus is becoming a very important commodity now, and something which you will see more and more coveted by employees and employers and such. We have so much cheap dopamine and entertainment in modern society, and it's very hard for us, and for kids particularly, to hold focus. And ADHD. So there's all of these ailments and challenges that we suffer, from depression to anxiety to heart disease to diabetes to backache to cavities. They're all what are called evolutionary mismatch diseases. They're all things that are a consequence of us living unnaturally to our evolved state. And 80% of things we die from, even most cancers, are all a consequence of us living differently to how we're evolved to live. And so ADHD is no different. It's another one. So I was fortunate enough to take part in Alone, the TV show. So we can go on. We can talk about contrived TV shows. Alone is considered within the bushcraft community as the survival Olympics. It is the one true non-contrived show out there. You genuinely are dropped into the wild with just a camera, and there's no film crew, and you have to survive as long as possible in the wilderness. And the only thing that is at all contrived is they would occasionally, when they gave me new batteries and new data cards, they would basically say, Tom, please can you talk about this, because they want to they want the emotional backstory. Otherwise, I'm just talking about fishing. And so that's literally, otherwise, every 7 days, we've got a medical for 20 minutes, which is incredible to see another human. In fact, a lot of people quit after they have that medical because you feel this absence of humanity, this, this come down after this incredible high of talking to another human. So I guess bringing that back to cheap dopamine, I mean, that was one thing, this huge dose of oxytocin, the kind of hug we get from a hug and love and when a mother sees her child. But also dopamine, like there was no other source of dopamine out there for me other than fishing and eating. And I would live to fish. I would spend 4 hours a day out there just casting, reeling. And it was very akin to being in a casino and pulling the arm of a fruit machine, a one-armed bandit. Every cast would be a little dopamine. Am I going to catch a fish? And then, it might catch on the riverbed and you get this, oh, was that a fish? This rush. And then when you actually catch one, your whole body is like pulsating with energy and adrenaline and dopamine. The thrill is exceptional. It would keep you out there. And that's what these mechanisms were for. And that's why we have dopamine. It's this reward system to keep us out there hunting, foraging, to find new things. And it was such a privilege to live in the wild in this baseline existence and notice what the brain chemistry is for. And honestly, it's changed me dramatically. I could talk about other ways it's changed me physically as well. But it's I'm going to be writing a book about this whole thing. It's a 2-year process and it's terrifying, but I'm writing a book called You Are an Animal to help people to change their lens of who, how we are and what simple things we can do to reconnect with that and to live happier, healthier lives. I'll stop ranting, but one last thing. I was astonished in my research to learn that most primates in zoos, for example, are on antidepressants and bears as well. There's the polar bears on Prozac and chimpanzees on Xanax because, and we're not too dissimilar, except we're the zookeeper, but we choose to confine ourselves and to feed ourselves these diets which are unnatural. And anyway, I could rant about this for hours, but...
I think it's fascinating. I think we could do a whole podcast episode or a whole series of podcasts. Just, I listen to a lot of this stuff about the dopamine and psychology and it all resonates. And for our listeners that, don't have the opportunity, I'm sitting here looking at you on a screen. So I see how excited you are about this as you're getting all the energy amped up and the dopamine flowing and all that stuff. So I'm looking forward to reading that book. It's, oh boy. So as far as there's so many different directions I want to go and cover, as far as your guests that you typically see, is it, I don't want to label them, but I mean, who's the typical person? Is there a typical person? How would you describe the people that generally want to do this? And then how would you describe the people, I guess, the different types of people and how they show up when they get on the trips? Have you come to any conclusions around that?
Yeah, I mean, so our trips are designed for people that have never practiced any bushcraft, who may have never been camping before. They're just people that, want to come and live this experience and feel alive and reconnect with, I guess, that inner hunter-gatherer and nature. So, but with that being said, I would say that if I had to give our avatar, our typical guest, they're probably about 70% male. We are seeing more and more females joining now, which is fantastic. And they tend to be from the UK, Europe, US. They're probably mid-30s. They've got a decent job, but they feel like they've not got enough adventure in their life. They feel just they're not living. They're just killing time with it. And so, yeah, I think that that's a typical person. But we've had a 78-year-old. We've had we recently did our first family one last year, which had 11-year-olds. We've had, as I said, we've had billionaires. We've had all sorts of different people come on our trips, and we've had people that who even didn't kind of want to necessarily do this, or they've had a friend like this mum I was saying about who has brought them along, and they tend to be the people that have the biggest impact if they see it through, because it's just such a giant stride out of their comfort zone. I like to say, the further you go out of your comfort zone, the more you have to grow to accommodate it. And then when you come back in and you have day-to-day challenges in life, maybe you got an 8-hour delay at the airport, you're just like, whatever. I just survived on a desert island, and it's it's another muscle that needs working. And I think the more we do these things, more we push ourselves, the easier challenges are to deal with in life. And so we had this lady who's from New Zealand. She had never left New Zealand before, never really done any traveling, and she was very overweight, probably, I don't know, like 240 pounds in American. Um, and she's ended up losing, like, I don't know, over 50% of her body weight. She now runs marathons. She travels the world. She just did a second trip with us. I don't like to label our trips as transformational travel, but for many people, it's the first time they've kind of got off the hamster wheel of life and stopped and looked around and gone, shit, why am I happier? Now I've got literally nothing and I'm on a desert island than I do with all my creature comforts back home. And it kind of reframes things for them to get a bit more clarity and perspective, which is really nice.
Yeah, I love that. And it's interesting because I was fortunate growing up. My dad used to kind of go do that. That's what we did.
Yeah. Yeah.
My dad would take me up in the mountains and in the snowstorm and, give me 3 matches and say, okay, you've got 2 hours, figure it out, and he just kind of stayed back. And this was like when I was like 12, or whatever. I mean, that's just the way I was brought up. And I'm not saying I'm a desert island expert. You should not invite me to teach any bushcraft because I don't know it. But it made an impact on me, And then later on, I ended up joining. I was in the military. I did some survival school in the military. And you're right. The sense of accomplishment, the sense of just feeling a little bit more independent, a little bit more confident, that comes from getting through those experiences is huge. And not everybody has those opportunities in their regular life. If your regular life is get up in the morning, make breakfast, go to work, sit in meetings all day, come home, hang out with your wife and kids. I mean, there's things you can do, that you might label as successful, but it's everybody else around you is doing the same things too. And it's just kind of, I don't know, I'm kind of rambling, I guess, but I'm curious about teenagers. That's why I brought that up. Okay.
Well, yeah,
go ahead.
Well, I think it's wonderful that your father did that and that you spent that time at that formative age. And I feel very strongly that teenagers and more people need to do that. So again, evolutionary speaking, when you're a teenager, you have a lot of pent up energy. I think a lot of it was maybe to leave our tribe to spread genetics further afield. We have this energy, and it's now kind of misspent. For a long time, you went to war, or you went down the mine, or you went to the factory. Now you fight, you drive cars fast, you do drugs. It's rare that it's channeled for good. And so I truly believe that all you have to do is look at all the different tribes around the world that independently have realized that rites of passage, coming of age experience are really very important. And so you've got all these different rituals that independently have come about, but in the Western world, we don't have that. And I think at that formative time in life, having kids have to do challenges and build up that self-belief and self-confidence and use that energy for common good and development is critical. And I really would love to see more rites of passages kind of experiences growing in Western society.
Yeah, I remember reading something that, like you touched on, evolutionarily, like when we get to puberty, we actually our chemistry and everything actually changes to the sense that we want to get away from our parents. We want to create that space. We don't like our parents, basically. It's kind of, using other words, others might argue, but it creates this thing where I don't want to be around them. They're obnoxious, they're stupid, they're old, they're whatever, and they're going to create space. And how are they going to create space? Like you said, they used to go do other things. And in this world, how do they create space? They pick up their phone and they, or they go to their room for hours on end, or they're doing drugs, or, I'm not saying all kids at this point in our generation are falling apart, but they're going to do something to get away from their parents.
I did it. So sneaking out the window, go and get blind drunk.
Yeah, I don't think anybody listening to this can't at least say, yeah, there were times I wanted to get away from my parents and create space. And that, it's an interesting thing. And have you had many? I don't know how you define this, but I'm imagining people showing up with their kids on your trips. They're teenagers.
Yeah, so only
And their teenagers are like, I don't want to be here with my dad. So
yeah, we normally it's 18 and above, but we have done when we've done private trips. We did one recently. It was 5 Canadian dads and their 5 sons, and they were amazing. And it was like a coming of age experience. And the dads were sharing stories they wouldn't normally tell their children, and it was just like they were all treating them like adults. And then they did the 5 days training together. Then they broke away into 2 tribes, the dads and the sons. And the dads were like, can we have some more rum? Can we have some food? We can't be bothered to go and catch fish. And the kids were like, amazing, absolutely amazing, hardworking. We're going to prove them wrong. Caught so many fish and put their dads to shame.
that's very cool. All right. I want to go back to walking to the North Pole. Because that was kind of your first big, like, holy cow, doing this. You said you trained for it for 2 years. What did you learn about yourself? Either in the training or just through the whole thing. What's the biggest thing you learned about yourself?
I mean, I guess it was the first time I built any self-confidence. Before then, I just thought I was useless, fat, stupid, and when I did that, I came back with, a bit of self-belief. And I think it helped to justify why I am worthy to set up this company, for example. Like, we often don't allow ourselves to take any chance. We give ourselves labels. We allow our labels to identify and to define us. And, they're all completely in our head. And so much of what holds us back is just limiting beliefs. And so it really helped me to redefine kind of belief in myself to go forth and do things. And then it really built up my mental resilience as well. I think in those 2 years of training, we learned about kind of the rule of 40%. It's like when you want to give up on something, when you're running along and you just want to stop and it hurts, you're basically at 40% of your physical limit. You're mentally giving up. So many times we just give up because it hurts and we mentally give up. But your body, you've got so many more gears that you can engage so we always did every exercise kind of. Our instructor said, if you were hanging from a branch and certain death awaited below you, you wouldn't just go, I give up, and open your hands. You would hold on until every sinew, every muscle was screaming and your fingers slips, and you would eventually fall. And that's how we approached every exercise. And so then when we're actually walking to the North Pole, we never ever mentally gave up and said, I can't do it anymore. I physically gave up. And it's the only time in my life where I've physically failed, where I literally fell asleep twice walking and just fell into the snow, kind of reached that total failure of the body. And so again, like kind of blowing up this balloon, going so far out of your comfort zone, come back in, and then day-to-day adversity and challenges, just that little bit easier to kind of deal with.
So what I hear you saying, so if we give up mentally before we get to the point of physical exhaustion, but we need to use our mental capacities in order to acknowledge that, to recognize that, to remind ourselves of that. I heard you say one thing is like, okay, what I heard was, okay, maybe imagine a scenario that's not really what the scenario is. So if you're hanging over, if you're hanging from a rope or a bar, you imagine that, okay, it's certain death below. I mean, how do you do that? I guess that's what I'm saying. Is how do you use your mind? That's
just an analogy. Like if you were hanging, you wouldn't just give up. Yeah. You would be like, And I guess recently I've started doing ice baths with my wife. We're doing one tomorrow. I fucking hate it. It's horrible. Honestly, it's excruciating. It's like my calves were seizing like I had cramp. But I pride myself on kind of being mentally strong. So I'm like observing the pain, telling myself that this is just my brain telling me that I'm in pain and then it's okay. And after about 2 minutes of just trying to ignore the pain, then you enter this different kind of almost bliss-like state. The first time I gave up after 2 minutes, it was just so painful. Then the second time, after 2 minutes, the pain dissipated and I got visuals and stuff as I just sat there, but the pain went away and I lasted 7 minutes and, the water's like 0 degrees. And it's like, it's a mental challenge of just pushing past kind of that pain threshold. And, the mind always gives up before the body. And I think just recognizing that when you're running and going for a jog, just you find yourself stopping and you just mentally gave up. I'm picking yourself up on that. I'm mentally giving up. I'm not physically giving up.
So you're using your mind by being aware of it, you're using your mind to overcome your mind, which is a challenge. So what I'm reading into this is, and I believe it myself, is that when you do overcome a challenge, then it helps you realize, oh, wait, maybe I can do this. So then the next time you can go a little bit further. And it's dependent on actually doing something that you didn't think you could do, really, right?
Yeah.
Do something you don't think you can do. And then your barometer changes or your limit changes and you realize, oh, wait a minute, I walked to the North Pole.
Yeah.
I can, maybe I can sit in this ice bath a little longer or even get in the ice bath because like most people wouldn't even do that. And then, and it's like, okay, I did it for 2 minutes. Next time I can do it for, I guess where I'm going with that is what I'm hearing is it's just repeated pushing your limits helps changes your limits.
Yeah, and there's a podcast recently I was listening to with Andrew Huberman and David Goggins, and he was talking about a new part of the brain that they've only identified in the last 2 years. I can't remember what it's called, the secondary hippocampus, etc. It gets bigger when you do things that you don't want to do. When you have that turn on the cold shower or go to that workout at 5 a.m. or whatever it is, every time you force yourself to do these things, it gets bigger, and it's almost basically the willpower part of the brain. And as soon as you start enjoying that thing you were doing, it doesn't grow. So you literally have to be pushing the envelope further to be things. As soon as you start enjoying your CrossFit or whatever, it's not growing. But and there's also a strong correlation between people's will to live later on in life as well. Like it's a very useful part of the brain, that kind of willpower area to be nurturing and growing.
It's all such fascinating stuff. I have a feeling you and I listen to a lot of the same podcasts. I can tell we do already.
Yeah, for sure.
And, it's fascinating stuff. Do you have, like, when you've got a group on the island, how much of the training involves kind of mindset stuff? Because I think that's such an important part of it. Are people open to that when they show up, or do they just like, I just want to learn how to make a fire, I want to learn how to build a shelter, or are they open to these conversations like you and I are having right now?
Yeah, I don't think they've come into the experience expecting there to be much coaching there and growth there. And I'd say like 80-90% of what we teach is bushcraft skills, making fire by friction, by rubbing sticks together and weaving and this. But I do when I teach and when my other instructors teach, I do a kind of lecture on psychology and examples of what works for me on the TV show Alone and the North Pole and stuff. And so there's absolutely a chapter on it. But it's not a huge part of it. But it is immensely important. So like a challenge I did alone, I would say is exactly 50% mental, 50% skill-based. And you see it time and time again that the people that survive in these adverse situations survive because of their mentality, not because of their skills.
So if you were going to train somebody to go on alone or to walk to the North Pole or something like that, you're going to spend a lot more time working on the mindset stuff. Obviously, you need some of the bushcraft skills to do some of those things, but that's what I hear. And
yeah, unless you have the right mindset, you're not going to win. You can have the best bushcraft skills in the world, but you've got to have the mindset.
I'm seeing like a blended trip of kind of like desert island survival with all the bushcraft skills and all that, and like a Tony Robbins event combined or something. Where it culminates with, the fire walk to the deserted island or something like that. But it would probably take, 3 or 4 weeks or something like that. But anyway, it's all very cool. I'm curious about kind of your relationships with other people, because sometimes people that work in adventure travel space doing stuff like you do, sometimes it's hard to find other people that kind of are on the same wavelength or kind of understand it, kind of get it. So I'm just curious, how has your journey impacted your relationships in your family, your life in general?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very, very, very picky about the instructors who run our trips, and they have to be special people that not just have an array of incredible bushcraft skills, but they have the right mentality, and that, you know, they can also be able to tell the engaging stories around the campfire and notice when someone goes in on themselves and quiet. And so finding the right instructors is really challenging. So we're really picky there. We're very picky about islands and instructors, and that's the cake. I mean, everything else is the sprinkles and the chocolate fudge. If you get those two things right, amazing people in amazing locations and nature, then people have a wonderful experience. But I think your question was different, right? It was more...
Yeah, it was more a little bit about kind of your, you know, interpersonal relationships, just outside of work. But before we go there, like, you just said something that just I want to touch on, because you said picky about the instructors you hire. It needs to be a good blend of bushcraft skills, ability to teach, you know, emotional intelligence, because ultimately you're working in the tourism business. You need to be able to connect with people. And when you said that, I thought, I have this story in my head that the person that's really interested in survival stuff, that would like actually go out and learn all this stuff, maybe by nature wouldn't be the most social, outgoing, friendly person. Because I'm thinking survivalist mentality. I'm thinking, I don't like people. I want to learn how to live out in the woods without anybody. That's just my story in my head. So I'm inviting you to challenge that.
Yeah. So I think there's a danger when we say survival of thinking of preppers who are stockpiling food and they've got a load of guns under their floorboards. And I think bushcraft and primitive skills is very much, it's, you know, it's hippies and people that are living in nature. And I think spending decent amounts of time living with adversity in nature smooths down the rough edges of people wonderfully, and it creates a lot of time for introspection. And it just, honestly, some of the most remarkable people, like all of our instructors, are in their own right extraordinary, fantastic humans who have done, you know, a bit of work on themselves. And so, yeah, I guess many will be naturally quite. I'm introverted, for example. Many will be quite introverted, and they'll need their time to decompress. They can, you know, but they can turn it on, and they've got the interpersonal skills as well.
All right, cool. I'm happy to ask that question, just for anybody else that might have any stories in their head, kind of like I might. But okay. Well, the other thing, you know, I did survival training in the military, so my instructors there were not a bunch of old hippies that have worn off the rough edges. They still had quite a few rough edges, so I probably created that story by looking at those instructors.
That's what we try to distance ourselves from. It's not boot camp. It's hard, but it's not boot camp.
So you're not hiring a lot of retired Green Berets coming in.
No, we don't have any ex-military.
Not that there's, I mean, I have a lot.
No. There's still remarkable, remarkable people.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. Okay. So now on, like, so for example, were you in a relationship when you decided to walk to the North Pole?
Yeah. So I'll tell the story. I met my wife a few months before I was going to the North Pole. I was in Goa on the beach in India, and I was like, "Hi, I was in a bar chatting her up. I was like, "My name's Tom. I'm walking to the North Pole," and she's like, "Oh, that's nice. My boyfriend is walking to the South Pole. It's harder, isn't it?" I was like, "What? What's the chances that you've got a boyfriend who's walking to the South Pole?" And then we added friends on Facebook, as you did back then. And she invited me to a house party, and she happened to live 4 roads away from me in London, despite us meeting in India. We literally lived up the same road. And she was like, so she told me that she had broken up with South Pole that day. And the reason she broke up with South Pole was because he was bipolar. I mean, North Pole, South Pole, bipolar. Not to make light of mental health problems, but it's just too perfect. And anyway, so yeah, I got with her, and we moved to Chile, and then I set up Desert Island Survival while she was pregnant with our son Edward, and so we kind of set ground rules of you're not going to be away more than 50 days a year. So she's very understanding. My son's very understanding. Like when I went away to Canada, it was for a minimum of 2 months. So we manage, but they also can join me on some lucky trips. We went to Indonesia and survived on an island as a family last year in August, and my son watches the YouTube videos that we've done, and he's really into it. And my wife's very independent, and so it works.
That's very cool. So she's on board. So because I mean, I'm sure you can imagine scenarios where there's a lot of people out there that would not be such a good fit for somebody that was doing what might be defined by some as, crazy or whatever.
Yeah, she's not worried about the risk. And that's the one thing for clarifying, that desert island survival sounds risky and dangerous. The most dangerous thing is coconuts falling on people's heads or someone cutting themselves with a machete. But there's many lions and tigers.
I was thinking more like walking to the North Pole, or
okay, yeah.
some of the things that I know that that you've done being on alone, because I'm sure there's safety measures there, but still,
yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Let's talk about that. What are the risks of doing something like alone?
The biggest risk might be that you were to cut yourself with your axe into your femoral artery and unable to get a tourniquet on there, and you've got 4 minutes and you bleed out. But you'd be pretty unlucky to do that. But if you do that, you're not coming back. But the one that most people consider is obviously bears. We were firmly in bear territory. I only saw one. I had a lot of bear prints and a bit of scat around my camp, but I never really got bothered by them. But some other competitors did. We carried bear spray, bear bangers, and air horn. So you always have these things on your person. At the beginning, I would not cook near my shelter. I'd go like 200 meters away, and I was very cautious. And you become more and more lackadaisical about it as it goes on, and I ended up keeping dried fish in my shelter and doing all the things you're not meant to do. But yeah, though, you do have to be mindful. Bears are risky. Moose can be very dangerous as well, because they're big as a horse with a brain the size of a walnut, and so if you get between them and where they want to go, they're going to trample you. But in general, the risks are mitigated. You phone in every morning at 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. and say, I'm alive. Sorry, you send a message.
I'm curious. Did they, because I grew up in the mountains and was a guide in Montana, and I'd learned that there's a difference between black bear poop or scat. I'm going to call it scat, black bear scat, and grizzly bear scat. And they taught us how to tell the difference. Was the grizzly bear scat always had bear bells, and it smelled like pepper. That's how you could tell the difference.
Interesting. I did not know that.
Like pepper spray. I should have said pepper spray. That makes the joke a little bit better. It has bear bells.
Sorry.
It has bear bells in it, and it smells like pepper spray. So anyway, sorry. That's a bad joke, but maybe I'll edit that part out. But anyway, fascinating conversation. I think you and I could just go on forever. And what did I forget to ask? What should I have asked, or what do you think our listeners really need to know about you, your company, or any parting thoughts on adventure travel, or kind of what you're doing in general that you'd like to share with them before we wrap it up?
I mean, if they want to check out Desert Island Survival, it's desertislandsurvival.com. I'm also putting together a new company, which is going to be an kind of collection of just really seriously cool bushcraft adventures around the world in different environments. So we're doing stuff in Sweden, Botswana, the Amazon, Guyana, Canada, similar kind of concepts, but different environments. That'll be coming soon. If you go to tomwilliams.tv, I did a blog about my time on alone and shared a lot of the kind of behind the scenes and epiphanies. I think one thing I didn't really touch on is, so I was saying about this kind of low dopamine and the impact it had on me when I was just living in the wild. The other thing that's crazy is, I only ate fish and leaves and berries for 35 days. So I was just on my own, eating what I could find from the land. And it was amazing the impact that had on my body. I used to suffer with irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, and that went away. And I thought it might come back, when I introduced wheat or dairy or something. And it hasn't come back 2 years later. It's like my gut biome had a total reset through living, again, the food that we were designed to eat. And my body was less inflamed. I don't suffer. I used to get some anxiety that hasn't come back. I just generally feel so much better from this kind of time away. So looking at creating another experience called the Primal Reset, where it allows people to, before their experience, to have their kind of gut biome checked. We do epigenetic age test and VO2 max and all that stuff, and your blood works. And then you go and we teach you the survival skills. You go and live out in the wilderness for 3 weeks, and we come back and we see how big an impact that can have on you. And from my experience, I think it could be tremendously impactful for people. So that's kind of what's on the horizon.
That sounds very cool. Yeah, that sounds very, very cool. I suspect you'll do really well with that. I think there's a lot of people interested in that type of thing. I'm curious, you mentioned that you thought maybe when you came back and kind of added some things back to your diet that those problems might return, but I suspect you didn't go right. I suspect you made some changes to your diet anyway that stuck, right?
The first week you have your diet controlled by a dietitian, so you can't just have whatever you want anyway. So they because you've had such limited food that certain minerals and stuff can damage you for a spike. Oh, wow. So we had we were refed. And then it took me. I think I didn't have caffeine for 2 months. I did have beer because we went and had a beer, and the woman gave us a shot of tequila or something 2 days after we came out, but in the bar. But generally, I drink far less. I'm much more kind to my body, I think, after this experience. After I felt this significant difference and realized I'm an animal more so than I did before. But yeah, I definitely made I'm more conscious with my food choices. I don't necessarily believe exclusively in paleo, because paleolithically we lived all around the world, from kind of Inuits to savannas of Africa, but much closer to that. Far less sugars, far less starch products and carbohydrates, and a wide variety of vegetables and lots of protein, lots and lots of protein. It's definitely made me more mindful of what to eat. That's very cool. I'm happy that we touched on that. Thank you for bringing that up, because it's an important part of life. And that's exciting. I'm gonna keep an eye on what you're doing, and when you get all that set up, let's have another conversation. So 100%.
Tom, I appreciate you being on the show. We're going to have your website linked right there in the show notes, so anybody listening to this, please do click through to the website. He's got some cool stuff going on. If you're a listener to this and you go on one of Tom's trips, I want to hear about it. I want to bring you back on, and I want to include you in an episode as well. So anybody listening to this, go on a trip with Tom, and then let's chat about it. So Tom, thank you so much for joining me on the show here. You have a good day.
Thank you, Jason.
I trust you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed recording it. If you're enjoying the Big World Made Small podcast, please take a moment to tell the algorithm by subscribing and posting a review so that others can benefit as well. I also invite you to take a quick trip over to bigworldmadesmall.com and join our private adventure travel community to receive new episode notifications, special access to our guest experts, and perhaps even some exclusive partner offers that we haven't discussed on the podcast. I'll publish another episode soon. Until then, keep exploring. It's the best way to make a big world feel just a bit smaller.